Joining us live from Washington, D.C. is Rachel Rizzo, non-resident senior fellow at the Europe Center of the Atlantic Council. Rachel, very grateful that you've joined us on the show. Thanks very much for that. I want to start with Ursula von der Leyen's plan called the ReArm Europe package. The money, it seems, will come from looser fiscal, if you like, restraints on members, meaning they won't be punished for excessive deficits when they spend on defense. I mean, to you, is this idea workable?
I mean, I do think it's workable. One of the consistent issues for European defense spending are these fiscal rules that they always have to work around. I mean, this has been a big issue in Germany specifically. You know, there was just a debate happening in Germany this week about using the Bundestag's lame duck session to loosen some fiscal rules. So we're not just seeing this happen at the EU level, we're seeing it happen at the state level as well. So the hope for ReArm Europe is that they can loosen fiscal rules, which will allow states more flexibility on spending, but also on how they use EU money as well. So I think we have to wait and see how this emergency summit goes later today, your time, to see what emerges in terms of details.
Rachel, the European Union is made up of 27 countries with different agendas, different domestic politics, different budgets. What would you say is the biggest challenge standing in the way of the bloc having a unified strategy moving forward?
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, this is the inherent challenge with multilateral institutions. You know, NATO has the same problem too sometimes. It's a consensus-based organization with 32 allies, and you can't make major decisions even if one ally disagrees. The EU is a little bit looser on its rules, and it's just a bigger organization. It deals with broader issues. So while there are some areas that might have consensus over all 27 members, other issues are a little bit more fraught, and the Ukraine support is one of those issues. I mean, we see Hungary really pushing back on continued EU support, on the Russian frozen assets, for example, that are sitting in a Belgian bank that they don't want the EU to be able to use to rearm Ukraine or to provide continued support for Ukraine. So I think the issue is, you have countries that have different visions for how the EU should continue to support, but also they get benefits from the EU. So I think there's pressure that can be put there by von der Leyen and her team. We just have to see what that pressure might look like.
Rachel, I want to ask you about the EU's position on nuclear deterrence. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, we know, says he's ready to start discussions on nuclear deterrence with European allies. France, the only nuclear power within the EU, UK, of course, the other, but not part of the EU. It's not new. It's been, on the table for a few years now, but do you see renewed traction given the changed landscape?
I do see renewed traction, but nuclear sharing is a really difficult issue for many reasons. It's highly political. It's even more fraught than the topic of, figuring out how to spend more on defense and to rearm Ukraine. This gets to the heart of national defense, and the French nuclear deterrent is something that France says is for its own use, because the rest of Europe, the rest of NATO, has been under the U.S. nuclear deterrent. It still is under the U.S. nuclear deterrent. And actually, I don't see that changing anytime soon. So while I think it's good for these discussions to be had, it would really surprise me if we got to a point where France or even the UK fundamentally changed their stance on nuclear sharing. Again, though, the news is moving so quickly these days that things that seemed totally unbelievable just last week are now coming to fruition. So what I say now could be totally irrelevant in a few days, but it would really surprise me if this was a major shift in French nuclear policy.
Right. Rachel, quick question on where Germany is in all of this. We've seen leadership from obviously France, from Ursula von der Leyen, from the UK as well. I mean, how important is the German role, given that it's one of the key, if you like, economic players, for the continent?
This is a huge issue for Germany. I mean, it is the largest economy in Europe, one of the top economies in the world, actually, but it just hasn't been able to step up to the plate in the way that it should in terms of security and defense issues. Now, I think it deserves a lot of credit for the support that it's been able to provide for Ukraine, but the way that the German system works, it's slow, it's bureaucratic, it's really not efficient. And so this incoming Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, has a new vision for the role that Germany should be playing. It's much more forward-leaning. But remember, just a few years ago, Olaf Scholz also gave a speech, this is the outgoing German Chancellor, about a sea change in the way Germany sees itself. And that was a major speech that happened just days after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And that sea change in Germany really hasn't come to pass. So I'm hopeful that this new German government, this incoming German government, will really be able to stand up Germany the way that it should and have it play the role that it should in NATO and Europe. But again, this is tough, much tougher to do than it is to say. So I think we have to give it a little while and see how this plays out.
All right, Rachel, thank you very much for your time and your insights today. That is Rachel Rizzo, non-resident senior fellow at the Europe Center of the Atlantic Council.